The Dream of the Queen, a fairy tale by Lily Violet Rose, Berlin, 2009. Once upon a time, there was a queen ruling a country in which was peace since uncounted centuries. The queen's people lived happily in the mountains, the valleys, at the hills, in the woods, at the riversides, in the deserts, and at the seaside. The land was as soft and tender as fur, the water as smooth as silk, and the plants seemed to be made out of soft wool. The land was as beautiful as paradise. Animals and plants were loved by everyone who saw them. The name of the country was forgotten since a long time, because everyone who lived there just talked about the land as if he was talking about paradise. So great was everything. And at the royal court they invited friends in paradisum, into paradise, 'cause they talked Latin there. And indeed, it could have stayed a paradise if there wouldn't have been the dream of the queen. One night, shortly before the queen gave birth to her first child, she yanked out of a nightmare, sweating all over. Her husband already held her in his arms, asking her compassionately what was going on. Confused, she spluttered the words, "Flood, nemesis, death, people." Then she was blinded by a glistening light she saw with her inner eyes before she fainted. Just a couple of days later, she gave birth to a healthy daughter whose skin was shimmering like ivory. So the name Lily was given to her, which was the symbol for the royal family since centuries. The king and the queen worried about their people. They sent out messengers to search for floods, nemesis, and death all over the land. But nothing was found. Just a pretty normal amount of people were dying, and melting water, which came from the mountains, was flooding the meadows in springtime, as it had done so every year. The next month, the queen never again had that nightmare, so by and by the dream was forgotten, till a few years later, the queen again was pregnant. She yanked out of a dream again, sweating. This time, she remembered a bit more than just a few words. She talked about large flooding catastrophes, avalanches, storms, and giant waves that came from the ocean, jumped at the seaside, drowning people and taking them away back to the sea. This time the queen saw 2 lights before she fainted. Already a few days later, the queen and the king sent out messengers to interview the people. Before they could come back for report, the queen gave birth to a second daughter, whose skin was shimmering violet and purple. The child was given the name Violet. Within the next months, the king and the queen worried about the stories they were told. The people that lived in the mountains had seen strong avalanches in faraway valleys that winter, burying their cows, and in the summer the glaciers were melting much more quickly than ever. The people that lived in the meadows were mourning about heavy floods that were destroying houses and that killed their animals. The people in the woods were reporting about the dying out of healing plants that grew wildly in the woods. The nomads in the deserts were talking about large fires in the bushes that had destroyed the vegetation. And the people that lived by the seaside were fighting against the high tides that became higher and higher from year to year. The world seemed to get upside down, even it was not as disastrous as it was in the dream of the queen. The queen and the king were calling for the best scientists of the country to check the situation. They checked it pretty long. The queen became pregnant with a third child, and shortly before she gave birth to it, she yanked out of her nightmare again. In a sudden rush, she told her husband the following: "A storm that is sweeping away the woods. We lose the glaciers. A giant amount of water is shooting into the valleys. Death and nemesis, water in the meadows. A giant wave is destroying the seaside. Fire in the deserts. Nemesis and death everywhere. Screaming children, crying mothers and fathers. Water, water, lots of water. Water up to the top of the highest mountains." Before the queen did faint this time, she saw 3 lights. The king was alarmed. He gave order to the scientists to work quicker and to propose solutions for the problem. But before they could meet for a crisis conference, the queen gave birth to her third daughter, whose cheeks were as rose and purple like a flower blossom. She was given the name Rose, and she was loved by everyone who saw her, so enchanting was her face.